This is one of the biggest rivalries in sports. So, regardless of the records, it's always huge and always brings a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, and a lot of pride from these fan bases and from these two programs. However, when it means first place in the conference, and now we come to one that's historic to a whole new level because it's the last showdown, of course, as members of the Big 12. It's OU, it's Texas, it's Red River, something, whatever you want to throw in there to conclude the statement. It's hate week, I've heard it called. It's all of those things. It's Oklahoma, Texas, and we'll break it down here for the next hour here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all being here. We've got the show that we present here each and every week with Jason Ray, our post-game host, also Sooner Tailgate Live on Fridays. So join Jason throughout the week here on the SD1 Sports Oklahoma channel. Also, all of this is simulcasted on our Big 12 channel that we would love for you to take part in as well. So we will provide the Big 12 channel link if you're watching here on the Oklahoma channel for you to go subscribe to our Big 12 channel. And yes, we will transition you to the SEC channel when that becomes a thing. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mark. As you mentioned here, and as we talked before, it's really for me the most exciting week of the college football season for sure. Leading up to it, there's a lot of, people are going at it on Sunday night and Monday, like getting ready. So it is, it's all, like I said, it's always big, it's always exciting, and I know that we'll get into this a lot more. But this is the first undefeated versus undefeated matchup since 2011. And so there's a lot more on the line, I think, in this game than there has been, maybe the last couple of years. So, very excited to get cranked up and get ready to go.
All right, folks, leave those comments and questions there in the chat. We will get to them, and we have a Texas guest headed our way, so we will break down the matchups, both sides of the ball. And I will start with what I started with at the top of the show, and that's I'm a purist. I love college football. Maybe some of this has been lost from the newer generation that's looking at the playoffs all the time. But for these particular matchups, there's about 5 of them across America that it doesn't matter to me in a certain respect what their records are. When Oklahoma and Texas are on the field, that's all I need. And but obviously in the moment, the 2023 season and everything that it means towards winning a championship, this one becomes magnified a zillion times and becomes a national focus. Let's look back before we dive into this matchup. Of course, Oklahoma notched a huge win, 50-20, the final score against Iowa State. Now, it was competitive for close to a half. And there were a lot of big plays, and Iowa State was able to get on the board in a number of ways. So it wasn't a blowout from the start. So your initial takeaways from the game against Iowa State?
Yeah, it was interesting, Mark. I think, for me and a lot of Oklahoma fans, I think a lot of people were expecting specifically how bad this Iowa State team has been on offense this year. And the improvement that Oklahoma's made on the defensive side of the ball, that, if Iowa State scores more than 10 points, then it's not necessarily a great look for the Oklahoma defense. And so you've got Iowa State that has 20 points on the board with 9 minutes to go in the first half. And it was a little bit, not necessarily for me, but I think Sooner Nation, it was a little bit of an element of, oh crap, what's that? Is this are we back to what's happened last year? The sky is falling type of mentality. So I think there was a couple of situations that led to that. There was a couple of busts in the secondary. One on the first touchdown play, where Key Lawrence was in a position to make a play. And he was a little bit indecisive whether he should go for the ball or go for the receiver. And he sort of got caught in no man's land, and he just didn't really do either. So caught a big touchdown there. I think on the second one, that was Billy Bowman's play where he took a peek into the backfield just for a half a second. Then he lost eyes on the receiver, and then they ended up him and I think Key Lawrence ran into each other, which caused the play to be a much longer play. So a couple of run plays, they gashed Oklahoma early on in the run game, specifically outside. So there's a couple of things that kind of play into that, Mark. Number one, from kind of looking at some of the film session and hearing from some of the players, like Iowa State ran a lot of stuff that Oklahoma did not prepare for and that they hadn't ran all season. And so, I mean, you're going to see that in some big games, right? I think you're going to see that this weekend on both sides for both Oklahoma and Texas. But I think the thing that I was pleasantly surprised with how bad things were going early on is how they adjusted really, really quickly. I think from the 9-minute mark in the second quarter throughout the remainder of the game, Oklahoma held Iowa State to less than 100 yards, like 2.8 yards per play. Obviously, no points. So I think in the past, this is a game that probably Oklahoma wins somewhere in the neighborhood of like 50-45 or something like that, and the wheels just kind of continue to fall off the bus, so to speak. But to their credit, the culture has changed a lot, and so they did not let 2 or 3 or 4 big plays turn into just a big downhill slide for this defense, for one. And I think, two, they made some adjustments that they weren't really able to make successfully in the past few years. So I think you take a little bit of the good with the bad. And, it's a classic game, Mark. I knew this kind of coming in. This was my thoughts. This was a classic game where I think, we use the word trap a lot, right? And so I could see a situation coming into this game where Oklahoma wasn't completely focused, wasn't ready for the game. They were looking ahead to Texas, but to their credit, they got everything turned around. So it wasn't one of those things where receivers were running wide open all game long. It was a couple of handful of plays where they were in the wrong play, or just a couple of plays where they're just, they weren't completely like 100% dialed in. And so I think that's those aren't things that are really concerning for me. If it was one of those things where just time after time after time throughout the game that Iowa State was gashing Oklahoma and Oklahoma couldn't make big plays. But, I was really, like I said, very pleased with, certainly the last 39 minutes of the game. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I thought was the best game that Oklahoma's played offensively all year. Obviously you've got the 77 points or 73 points against Arkansas State earlier on in the year, the 66 points against Tulsa. But I think for this game, as good as Iowa State's defense was coming into the game, Oklahoma put up 40 in the first half and really just kind of coasted, really set on the ball to a certain degree, and really didn't push much in the second half. And so against this defense, for Oklahoma to put 40 points on the board, Oklahoma was able to run the ball a little bit better than they have been in the past, over 5 yards per carry, I believe, in this game, or close to it. Perhaps. And so I think that is the area that you're very, if you're an Oklahoma fan, very, I think, not really surprised, but you're very pleased with what that does, because Iowa State, this doesn't happen to Iowa State. I think it's Oklahoma. Dylan Gabriel was the first 300-yard passer that they've had in a couple of years against them. They don't get blown out. They don't get this many points scored against them typically on a normal basis. So Dylan Gabriel looked, he was a little bit criticized with some plays that he left on the field against Cincinnati. He was much better in this game, and so I think you're very pleased with what you saw offensively, and continue to be, but playing at a high level on the offensive side of the ball as well.
And here we go, Jason, on my favorite topic concerning this football team, at least recently. Marcus Major, 19 carries. Gavin Sawchuk, 7. Tyree Walker, 4. Is that pretty much where we're headed with this running back room?
Yeah, I think so. Brent Venables alluded to a couple of things related to Gavin Sawchuk and Javante Barnes. Mentioned that Gavin Sawchuk was really just not in game shape. He'd had some he had some injuries in the fall that had kind of kept him out, and really wasn't in in great enough and good enough shape to kind of take the pounding. And so I think they were gradually getting him back. And really the same thing for Javante Barnes. Spoke about him a little bit last week, and just in terms of he's got some kind of nagging stuff going on, and he's just not completely where he's at, or where he should be, I think, at this point. And so I don't think anything like what I would call like doghouse related, where he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. I think just kind of getting back. So I think there's a couple of there's a couple of schools of thought here, I think, that are circulating, is that Oklahoma is very purposely bringing them along slowly, and the thought is maybe they unleash both Sawchuk and Barnes to a greater degree in this game, right? But I think I think it's just, I think Marcus Major is probably going to be the guy, and then you're going to see Tawee Walker more in short yardage situations and getting them some carries. So I don't know if for me, it's a situation where you want to get these kids, Barnes and Sawchuk, and if they're not completely ready, this isn't the one to get them ready in, so to speak. So I don't know. I think ultimately your guess is as good as mine. I think right now it looks like they like what they're getting from Marcus Major. As you mentioned, Sawchuk had 6 or 7 carries in the game. He had 2 specific plays where he was very, very bad in pass protection, picking up blitzers that he just didn't see or missed the assignment. So that's one of the things I think in this game, Mark, if they're not comfortable with him and pass pro, particularly looking at how good Texas's defensive line is coming into this game, then I think they're going to want to make sure that they have the utmost amount of trust in whoever they got out there.
And Jason, for a passing offense that is not supposed to have a big play threat, and of course these plays came in different shapes and sizes, 54, 49, 41, 39. So they put up some big yardage plays in the passing game.
Yeah, they really did. I think, Mark, it continues, I think, offensively for me, it continues to be the story of this season early on how well this wide receiver core is playing. It seems like, I mean, you'd mentioned some of the numbers there, but they've got a plethora of guys that they feel comfortable with, I think, Mark, running out there, whether it be coming into this game, Andrew Anthony was really kind of the leading receiver for Oklahoma, and he still is, but was a little bit of a quieter game for him. But you've got let's see, you've got 6 guys that have over 10 catches on the year for Oklahoma. Andrew Anthony is the leader with 22 catches for 387 yards, but you've got guys like Nick Anderson that have really began to solidify themselves. You've got Jaden Gibson, who doesn't have a ton of opportunities, but he's got 6 catches for 159 yards and 2 touchdowns. So and then Brennan Thompson, the Texas transfer, finally got kind of going for Oklahoma last week, in his first game of the year. So I think it's the story offensively. I think the offensive line and the running back room has not been quite as good as you would have expected coming in for Oklahoma, but I think the wide receiver core has been much better than you would anticipate. And as you mentioned, Oklahoma's got over 1,700 yards receiving, 17 touchdowns through the air, and they're doing it through a lot of ways, whether it be Jalil Farouk, Andrew Anthony, Nick Anderson, Drake Stoops, Jaden Gibson, even Gavin Freeman to that degree as well. So I think that gives Oklahoma a certain sigh of relief, I think, in terms of what this downfield passing attack in this passing game might look like for Oklahoma.
Two undefeated teams for the first time in 12 years. Let's continue to break it down from the Texas side. We got Matthew Miller checking in. So here's the deal with Matthew. He breaks it down for us each and every Tuesday on the Texas side with Texas Tuesdays here at the Voice of College Football. We'll give you more details on that. And Texas, Matthew and Jason both provide the post game. So much like Jason with Sooner Tailgate on Friday, these two provide. I got to thank both of you. Two of the shows that I don't need to participate in, so it gives me a bit of a break. So we appreciate Jason taking on a Friday show, plus the post game, and Matthew with Tuesdays and the post game as well. And here we are, guys. Texas, Oklahoma. Matthew, I know you're totally into this.
Oh, yeah, 100%. It's the best week of the year for us Texas fans. I would say Jason would say the same. I know you have a rivalry with Oklahoma State, but let's just be honest here. It's not the same. We actually win some games versus you guys. Those guys don't win any games versus you guys. So it's a totally different rivalry. He was just talking about the running game, and I completely agree with that. I actually saw a stat yesterday that was crazy to me. The last 22 Red River rivalries, 18 of those games were won by the team that led in rushing. That's how this game is won. So, I mean, and that's what's so interesting. You know, I've been saying stuff, Oklahoma's not as good because the record and everything, but like that. But then once this week gets here and you look into the stats of the history, the past, it honestly doesn't matter. Mark, I have a question for you. In 2015, who made the college football playoff?
That would be Oklahoma. Made the playoff.
And who did they lose to that year in the regular season?
I think I even remember the score. Was it not 36-20?
Texas? I thought it might have been. I think it was 24-17, though. I'm not 100% sure. I know we won with the worst coach in our history and one of the worst quarterbacks in our history. So that's why I say for Texas and Oklahoma fans, whoever comes in this game as the favorite, it does not matter. It really doesn't. Like, throw it out. Throughout the stats, it does not matter. Until you get in that environment, until you experience it as a player, it's going to be totally different. There's no other atmosphere in college football like this. It is 50-50 split right down the center of the field. Obviously, I think Texas is a better team on paper. Does that matter? The game is not played on paper. You can rip that up. It does not matter. I think this game's going to be close. I think there are keys to victory for both teams that they can achieve. And it's going to be interesting, too, because people forget Dylan Gabriel was not in this game last year, or maybe they don't if they're an Oklahoma fan, because you had to watch Davis Bevel, and that was not a pretty sight to watch. But this will be his first experience really playing in this game, and I think it will take him probably, honestly, a quarter to get used to it because it is a different environment.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think we, Matthew, me and you probably are on the same page that, I heard I saw something from Josh Pate the other day about this, that he felt like Oklahoma was probably talent-wise a year away from where Texas is currently. And that's not any necessarily slight to Oklahoma in the program right now. It's just, it is what it is. I think, now that I don't know that I would say that Texas is substantially better, but I think Texas is up and down the line talent wise. They're better at pretty much every position talent wise, right? But I think we all know in this game, as you mentioned, a lot of times you throw out the rankings, a lot of times you throw out the statistics, and there's been plenty of times where, and I think it's unfortunately for Oklahoma fans, it's happened more to Oklahoma than I think it has happened to Texas, even in the 90s, where Oklahoma's come in with a better team and just not played up to their capabilities, and Texas has won the game. And I think, Matthew, you're spot on about Dylan Gabriel. I think you would have liked him to be a little bit more battle tested coming into an environment like this. I think probably the biggest environment that he played in probably was the bowl game against Florida State last year, right? Didn't have the opportunity to play in this game. So very interested to see how he reacts to everything. Now he's on the field and went through the warm-up last year with a concussion protocol situation, but obviously it's different than playing. So I think there's a certain level of, you just don't know what to expect from that. And I think just generally speaking, these kids in this environment, right? It's so much different than anything else that you ever play in. Even if you consider playing in a bowl game or a college football playoff or a national championship game, the atmosphere in the situation is just so much different. And so there's a lot of times where kids come into this game and the moment's a little bit too big for them. And so we'll see how that goes on both sides. And Matt, I just have a question for you, just specifically. I know that there's a lot of intangibles, I think, around this game. I think Texas probably comes in this game for the first time in quite some time as having tons of pressure, I think, related to where they're at sitting nationally and looking at their schedule. It's hard to envision. I mean, you never know what happens, right? But it's hard to envision another loss on the schedule in the regular season. So maybe just talk to me a little bit about Texas having the pressure too, because they're certainly a playoff team. They're certainly a contender for a national championship, certainly after that game against Alabama and how they played through the first part of the season. Do you feel like they feel there's a lot of pressure on them to go out and win this game? Maybe not necessarily dominate, but put themselves in a position to not have people maybe second guessing them and say, Texas looked great, but yeah, they lost in the Cotton Bowl to Oklahoma type of situation.
Yeah, so I think that would apply to Texas teams of the past, but the leadership of this team, what I've seen, is just different. It is like I have not seen players lead players in this program in a very long time. And when we went to Wyoming, tied 10-10, going into the fourth quarter, you had Jalen Ford and Quinn Ewers on the sideline yelling at the team. I had not seen that in a super long time, where the leaders of the team, the best players on both sides of the ball, were like, this is it. We're doing this right now. We're taking advantage of this. And literally 6 minutes into that quarter, we were up by 21 points. And that's just the difference. That's the difference of this team. That's why I like this team so much more. It's not built on like the frills and all that. It's actually built in the trenches. It's built with leadership. It's built with program integrity, in my opinion. And I like that. That's why I like this team. Now, I will say this. I think it is very important that Texas gets off to a good start in this game, because I think it gets the ball rolling downhill for Oklahoma again. I think if we go up 10-0, Oklahoma's going to be like, wow, we're really here again. We just lost 49-0. That's in the back of their head. They're going to think about that probably. And I think that's very important. Now, it's the same. It's the opposite. If Oklahoma comes up 10-0, then it's like, oh, we can play with these guys. We can beat these guys. And that gives them a different level that I think they can play at. And I think it's whoever gets off to a fast start here, it's needed. And it's very important. I think it's the first quarter is going to be very, very, very important in this game, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm absolutely with you. I completely agree. I think there's going to be a lot on the shoulders of the quarterbacks in this game. I think more so probably Dylan Gabriel than than Quinn Ewers, because I've watched not every single play, but I've watched a good portion of all of Texas's games this year. They're different up front. I think that's the biggest difference for me looking at this team. And the leadership that you mentioned is certainly different. I think, and of course my Oklahoma fans here are probably going to hold their ears. I think Texas has the best defensive line in the country. I think it's certainly better than Alabama. I think it's better than Georgia. I think it's better than Ohio State. Whatever team that you want to insert, I think they're the best. So I think it's going to be a long day for Oklahoma being able to run the football. So I think the big thing is in weak fronts for Texas. So Texas is playing coverage, 4, 5, 6 guys. If Oklahoma is not able to run the ball in those types of situations, I think it's going to be a long day. And so I'm interested to see how Oklahoma gets creative in the running game. They've not been as strong as they would have anticipated in being able to run the ball between the tackles early on in this year. And so with Texas's ability to, maybe bully a little bit and be really, really strong up front, does Oklahoma look a little bit more on running the ball outside? Kansas had a little bit of success on a couple of plays on some of those outside option plays that they ran last week. So I think it's very cliche, I think, to say, but I think on both sides of the ball, this game is going to be won in the trenches. If Oklahoma, I would say if Oklahoma can run for 100 yards in this game and at least have the threat of the run and not have to, just mix in a run every now and then just to keep Texas defensive honest, I think that that's going to bode well for Oklahoma's opportunities in this game. Now, if they're not able and they run for 50, 60 yards in this game and Dylan Gabriel's having to throw the ball 45 to 50 times, then I think that spells a little bit of trouble for Oklahoma in this game.
Yeah, I said the same thing on the my stream last night. I said the key to victory, Oklahoma. I didn't say 100 yards, but I said 3.5 yards per carry. I think that's the number you need. It's just to keep us honest. You don't have to be great. You don't have to run it down our throats, but it's to keep us honest, hit us with play action over the top, because that is our weakness. The safeties of this team are our weakness. So I think you'll be able to exploit us deep if you're able to run. Otherwise, it's just going to be like the Alabama and Kansas game where you probably get one deep shot because that's all they really got. It was one, and then it got fixed. From there on out, if I believe if you can just be consistent and honestly kind of do what Sark did in the Alabama game, instead of running the ball, use your short passing game as a running, throw it out to the sides, get 3 or 4 yards that way. That's what he did versus Alabama because he realized, guess what? I can't really run versus this Alabama front, so I'm just going to get them east and west, and then later in the game, they're tired. We'll just bang it up the middle consistently. And I think that's what Oklahoma, honestly, that should be the game plan for them. Because I agree with you. Yeah. I've said I think this Texas front is either the best or second best in the country. I think Michigan's playing that really well up front as well right now. But a guy to watch out for your Oklahoma fans, if you're not aware, T'Vondre Sweat. He has risen so much this year, guys. If you man him up, he's going to beat anyone you throw at him. Anyone. I've seen multiple games in film where people are double teaming him and they can't move him. They literally just, it's a win if you stalemate. It's a win if you stalemate. It really is. He cannot be moved. So that's the guy. And then if you double team him, you're going to also have to worry about Byron Murphy. The interior is the best part of our team. Our defensive tackles are very good. They're both going to play in the NFL. T'Vondre Sweat's probably going to be a first-round pick. The edges, I would agree with you. I think that's where you need to attack if you do attack. I'm actually glad Kansas kind of did that because then you can throw that up on film and say, guys, what the hell was this? What are you doing? Because if we didn't see that in the Kansas game, you guys could have exploited it and it would have been an in-game adjustment, and those are much harder to make than, week-to-week adjustments.
Yeah, and I think no, you're absolutely spot on. And just one other thing that I was, injuries always play a big role in this game. On who's healthy. Obviously, Oklahoma was not healthy with Dylan Gabriel coming in last year. It looked really, really bad on the field with JT Sanders against Kansas on Saturday. And then I know Ryan Watts is really kind of day to day. Do you have any feel in terms of both of those players and on how if they'll be able to play on Saturday?
Yeah, so the Thursday press conference for Texas will be big because I guarantee you that's either the first or second question asked about those two guys. We also have Cole Hudson out, but honestly, DJ Campbell at the right guard position has played great the past couple of weeks, so I'm not really worried about that. Maurice Blackwell, who was going to start at the beginning of the season, he might be back too, so that would be nice to throw him in there for 10 to 15 plays. But Jatavian Sanders is by far the biggest injury concern for me because I think he is the biggest mismatch on our offense for any defense in the country. I really believe that. I think I've said this, and I know I'm going to get hate for it. I think in the NFL, he will be better than Brock Bowers because of how athletic he is, how big he is. He's getting better at blocking. I will say he's not a great blocker, but he's getting better. And he can't be covered by a linebacker because they're too slow, and safeties are just too small. So that's a game-changing type thing. Mm-hmm. It really is. Like you saw the offense start to stall out versus Kansas for a couple of drives because he wasn't in. And I like Xavier Worthy. I like A.D. Mitchell, but he just opens up the middle of the field. So that is a big injury. Sark, just like every coach, plays this close to the vest. I mean, he said he didn't really say anything other than ask me Thursday, basically. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see. To me, when he says he was limited in practice or he gave it a go in practice, that means he'll play. If he just said he wasn't practicing or something like just vague, then he's probably not going to play. So I'm very interested to see what he says tomorrow about Jatavian Sanders.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. I think he's definitely a difference maker for Texas, specifically against Alabama. Like he was one of the big reasons why Texas was able, I think, to win that game in terms of what they were able to do in the second half in the passing game. And yeah, I mean, I would expect, if it looked like it's a high ankle sprain, I mean, I would expect even if he does play, he's probably not anywhere near 100%. So that's an advantage certainly for Oklahoma in this game. If he attend, I mean, and of course, it could be one of those things where it wasn't as bad as it looked, and he's closer to 100% as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. It looked like high ankle. I'm hoping just a regular ankle sprain because with that, you tape it up, take some painkillers. You can usually go with that. High ankle, you cannot. High ankle is tendons, and that does not feel good. So he would probably give it a go, but it'd be, I would assume, probably 10 to 15 plays, and it's going to be Gunnar Helm, who I do like, but he's not Jatavian Sanders. He's not right now. I mean, Mel Kiper he has him as the second best tight end draft prospect. So this guy's a real NFL type player. That'd be a gigantic miss. And then for you guys, do you guys have any serious injuries? I think you're missing one guy from the beginning of the season, but I don't know anywhere else? Or do you have any injuries coming into this game?
No, I think Oklahoma's relatively healthy coming into this game, more so than they've been in the past. They've had one of their right guard, Savion Byrd, has been out for the last couple of games. He should be back this week against Texas. And so, yeah, no, I think Oklahoma's relatively healthy, and I think we talked a little bit about this right before you jumped on, Matt, but I think the biggest concern, I think, for Oklahoma in this game overall, I think the offensive line being able to protect and run the ball, particularly the interior of the offensive line for Oklahoma has been the area that they've struggled a little bit. They struggled with double teams, and they've just struggled being able to move guys off the ball. Struggled a little bit against Cincinnati with their front that they have, and I think that's the only team that's probably comparable to what Texas has in the middle with their defensive tackles as what Texas does, and struggled a little bit in that game, but found some success running the ball outside. So I think that's for Oklahoma offensively, the biggest key is being able to keep not only running the ball like we talked about, but keeping Dylan Gabriel upright and giving him time, because the Oklahoma wide receivers have been much better than I think anticipated coming into the season. And as you mentioned, the secondary, or very specifically the safeties, are probably the weak point for Texas in this game. And so I don't know. I know both defenses are a lot better. To me, I feel like this is going to be a relatively high-scoring game. It typically is in this game over the last 15 to 20 years. I think both defenses are going to have some success, but I think you're going to see both offenses play pretty well in this game.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is. I think Lebby and Sark both emptied the playbook here for the most part. I think all those secrets that they've been keeping the last couple of weeks disappear. I think you'll see a lot on film that you didn't. That's why I think halftime adjustments are going to be big too, because I know Texas is a second half scoring team, and Brent Venables does a good job adjusting the defense. And what have they given up, 20 points or something like that the whole second half of this year? So it's gonna be a good game. I really believe that. I think I had it as a 5-point game. I went with Texas, but it wouldn't shock me if Oklahoma wins. They're a good team. And then, what he said, Texas also struggled for 3 quarters at home against Kansas without the QB. I would say we had 661 yards, and the score doesn't reflect that. But, it was. I think it's going to be a good game. I really do. I don't know what's going to happen. It's definitely not going to be 49-0. I'll tell you that much. I know. I've given Oklahoma fans crap, and I know you guys are probably taking it, but it's not going to be 49-0 this year. And another question for you: who is the wide receiver that you would rely on the most in this game? Is it going to be Stoops in the slot? Is it going to be Anderson? Who do you think is going to be the most reliable weapon for OU?
It's interesting, Matt. I think Oklahoma I mentioned this. Oklahoma has 6 guys that have double-digit catches so far in the year. And I think Andrew Anthony had been really the go-to guy early on in the season. Not that he played bad, but Iowa State really did a good job on him. So you've got Nick Anderson. I think that you've got really a perfect scenario for Oklahoma in terms of their wide receiver core, because you've got a couple of really slot, kind of guys that, like when you talk about Drake Stoops, Gavin Freeman, Jacoby Pettaway, that's played a little bit. Brennan Thompson, obviously, a lot about him. Got his first action on Saturday for Oklahoma. But then you've got some guys on the outside, like an Andrew Anthony, like a Jalil Farouk. But then you've got some of the taller guys, like you've got 6'3", 6'4", and Jaden Gibson and Nick Anderson. So I think you've got a really, really good mix of what I think. For me, Nick Anderson, I think, is the best. He's still young, but I think he's the best receiver on the team. And he doesn't get a ton of opportunities just yet. But when he gets opportunities, he's making the most of them so far. So, I think you're going to see, it's interesting. You're going to see Oklahoma take some shots. They've been a little bit better on connecting it in some of these deep shots outside of the game against Cincinnati. So, I think you're gonna see a little bit of both of those, and being able to kind of work the short intermediate passing game. And then you've got Nick Anderson Andrew Anthony and even Jaden Gibson to a certain degree on some of those. I think the one thing that's different between the two teams is, as we talked a little bit about JT Sanders from Texas earlier, Oklahoma is pretty much non-existent at the tight end position this year. Austin Stogner's, Oklahoma brought him back from South Carolina last year. He's just he's been through multiple injuries and he's just not the same guy. He'll I think he's got 4 or 5 catches on the year, so he's not really a factor in the game. So Texas has if JT Sanders is anywhere close to 100%, that's a significant advantage that Texas has. But I think another key matchup in this game, as you've alluded to, I think both wide receiver core for Oklahoma and Texas are clearly the best two in the conference, right? When you look at what Texas has, with A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, Xavier Worthy, and then what I just mentioned for Oklahoma, I think whichever secondary can slow down that wide receiver core will get opportunities, because we know there's going to be situations where both Oklahoma and Texas are going to be, particularly on third downs, they're going to dial up some exotic blitzes. They're going to put pressure on the opposing quarterback, and so whose secondary is going to hold up in some of these one-on-one battles between there's going to be another big key to this game.
Yeah, for sure. And then at the running back position, I know you guys have gone through a bunch this year, and no one's really taken that and run with it. Who do you think? Because I feel like you have to eventually have a 2-guy rotation. I don't think you can go 4 deep. I really don't. Running back position, I do think you have to have a rotation, but you also have to be consistent because it is a rhythm position, just like quarterback. Once you get in rhythm, you feel good. You have to find the rushing lanes and stuff like that. Who do you think they finally end up on with those 2 guys probably?
So I think it's a little bit of a weird situation, Matt. I think it's one of those coming into the season. I think me and most people following this team had really high expectations for the running backs, just basically how Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk, even the last game of the year, how they ran the ball and how the offensive line protected and how they were able to just move people off the ball. And so I think coming into this year, it was a situation where it wasn't really even a question mark. It was going to be a clear strength of this team. Well, I think it's really turned the opposite in terms of, there's been Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes have been banged up through fall and early on in the season. They haven't really been healthy enough to get going. They're trying to get Gavin Sawchuk back in the mix a little bit. Played sparingly last week, had about 6 or 7 carries in the game. Javonte Barnes didn't play. I think there's some thoughts that just kind of in the same line of thinking that you'd mentioned. There's both Levy and Sark are going to kind of open up the playbook, empty the playbook, so to speak. So there's some school of thought that Oklahoma's been kind of slow playing Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes. But for me, I think right now it's Marcus Major is going to be the major player for, I think, Oklahoma in terms of running game. But I would say in comparison of the two teams, this is probably, in terms of production and play, maybe outside of the offensive line, this is the area where I think Texas has the biggest advantage in this game. In terms of just pure talent and productivity. When you look at Jonathan Brooks, I think he's the 3rd leading rusher in the country right now after his 200-plus yard game against Kansas last week. And then you've got Baxter and Blue there. And then Keelan Robinson hasn't ran a whole lot, but you've got, significant amount of production and depth out of that room, in which I think it's really kind of a transverse looking at both teams coming into the season. I think there was a little bit of question mark on the Texas side when you lose a guy like Bijan Robinson. Are you going to be as good, or can you be better? I think you can make an argument that they've been better earlier this year. Then, like I said, on the other side, Oklahoma's not been as good in the running game. Only averaging 4 yards per carry so far in the season. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think Oklahoma has to run outside, whether it's outside zone, whether it's a lot of counter, gap scheme stuff, jet sweeps, things like that. Oklahoma has to find a way to get the ball into their playmakers' hands on the outside. I wouldn't be surprised, Matt, if Oklahoma's leading rusher is not perhaps either Dylan Gabriel or a wide receiver in this game. As you know, Oklahoma had a I'll just say it was a completely ridiculous game plan coming into this game last year. And I know the quarterback play had something to do with it, but they ran they ran more of a kind of a single wing type of offense with
Yeah.
with wide receivers playing quarterback a lot of the time. So, but I will say, out of all of that, they did have some success with that running outside from time to time, particularly early on in the game. So I think you're going to see Oklahoma get creative on the outside. So long-winded answer to your question, Matthew, but I think you're going to see Marcus Major probably get the bulk of the carries, but then more inside, short yardage situations, goal line situations. Tawee Walker is a little bit more of kind of a bruiser type of back that you'll see in that situation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's the key for Oklahoma. I said you don't want to go north and south versus this defense. If you're going to try to attack it, I think it's east and west for Texas because David Benda, he's good. He's a good linebacker, but he's just slow. Like that's the one guy, if I was a Texas fan, that I'd be worried about. I was worried about in the Alabama game. You saw Jace McClellan beat him down the sideline for a wheel route. Those are the situations you want to avoid with David Benda. He's a good run stopper. He's good. He's a good tackling linebacker, but out in space, he worries me covering wide receivers or especially wide receivers, but running backs and tight ends. So I think you would have to avoid that for Texas. And I think that's something Oklahoma should try to exploit. I'm not worried about Jalen Ford anywhere. Jalen Ford is great. So, but David Bend is definitely the weak point along with our safety. So I think that's where I would try to exploit if I was Oklahoma. And I totally get it because Texas has struggled so much with the inside zone. We've literally the last 3 weeks is like the last time in the last 4 or 5 years we've been able to do that because we finally have a good interior to our offensive line. We have not had that for a long time. So it's been nice to hit that. But yeah, it'll be interesting how they attack our defense.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jalen Ford. I think it's another thing is interesting here is you've got two of the best linebackers in the country. I think when you look at Jalen Ford and Danny Sespen for Oklahoma and how they're playing, I think the one area, and it's not really, I don't know that I would say it's a concern, but Jaron Cannon for Oklahoma, in a game like this, he is new to the position. He was a freshman last year, redshirt, played a little bit of linebacker, but and I say new to the position. He's very, he has inexperienced. He's very inexperienced, and he played really, really well against Cincinnati, but he started to he regressed just a bit last week against Iowa State. Got caught up in some things, and so I think one of the things that he struggled with is Iowa State ran a lot of stuff that they didn't show all year on tape. And so that's going to be very similar to, I think, what we're going to see, at least early on from both of these offenses. So how can, some of these linebackers, how do they adjust to the things that maybe they're not seeing? A guy like Danny Sussman has a lot of, has a lot of recognition. I think the same thing would be for Jalen Ford there at the linebacker position for Texas. How do they react to things that they haven't seen thus far this year? So I think that'll be another interesting thing to look at in this game.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. What do you think is your guys' biggest weakness on the offensive line? Do you think it's the interior or the exterior?
Yeah, I think it's the interior. I think they've struggled. Savion Byrd is a guy that came on towards the end of last year, got some, and then started in the bowl game against Florida State. Oklahoma actually ran for almost 300 yards against Florida State last year. Really, I think it paved the way for a lot of optimism, I think, early on. And Oklahoma, it's just not really been there. And I think, when you look at the interior with Andrew Rame, McCabe Matower, and Savion Byrd, it's just not been as good as you would anticipated coming into this year. So it is I think the tackles have performed well. So I think, I think it's the interior, in which, again, I think there's tons of keys. You can look at very cliche things like turnovers, time of possession, like things like that. But I think this area, Oklahoma, I think defensively for Oklahoma, they're going to find some creative ways to get some pressure on yours from time to time. I think it's just going to happen. Venables is too good of when you give him almost an entire offseason to prepare. for something like this. I think he is really, really strong in that area. And I'm not undermining the how good Texas is up front on the offensive line. They are very, very good, but I think they're going to find some ways. But I think for me, the key to this game is going to, obviously we've talked about Dylan Gabriel, but how is the interior of Oklahoma's offensive line? How do they manage the interior of the defensive line? The clear, to your point, the clear strength of Texas's defense being the interior of the defense, and the very clear weakness for Oklahoma's offensive line being in there. How many? I mean, to use your word, how many stalemates does Oklahoma have? If Oklahoma's double teaming Sweat and it's just stalemate after stalemate after stalemate, then it's going to be some problems, I think. So I don't really anticipate a lot of just a ton of true. Oklahoma do a lot of business with just true drop back passing, staying in the pocket. They're going to have to get Dylan Gabriel outside the pocket, a lot of movement, sprints and things like that, to not have him just kind of right there within the confines of the tackle box. So yeah, I mean, I think it'll be it's certainly a situation where Oklahoma has struggled. Not necessarily they struggled in run blocking more than pass blocking. I think they've only given up 3 sacks all year, so they've been pretty good in pass pro. But the run side is the area probably the biggest concern.
I mean, honestly, as an Oklahoma fan, I'd rather struggle in that area because Dylan Gabriel is a smaller guy. If you're struggling in pass protection, he could end up getting hurt. But I think it's going to be interesting because with Quinn Ewers' way he can move now, I mean, he could move a little bit last year, but he's definitely taking advantage of it. There's definitely a possibility this comes down to whatever quarterback can make that key play with their legs on third down or in the red zone to get a touchdown. So I think that's another aspect, too, of where this game could be decided.
Considering who these two teams have played, considering what the production has been, Oklahoma basically dominating start to finish against most of these teams, showing some vulnerabilities in you could either take one side or the other against Cincinnati, that they just kind of played it safe. They played with the lead. Their defense never felt threatened in a way that they needed to generate a ton of offense, and it was just kind of one of those lazy games that you just kind of make it through and win by a couple touchdowns. Obviously, the SMU game was closer than it needed to be, and you're not going to blow out teams in conference play, especially start to finish. So yes, Iowa State was close for a quarter and a half at like 27-20, and so it wasn't a blowout from the beginning, but considering Texas goes to Bama, everybody downgrades Bama. I do as well. It's not a vintage Bama team, but still, they are definitely one of the 10 best teams in the country. And then the Kansas game, I know Kansas is still building a program, and Lance Leipold has done a remarkable job. But, to compare these two programs, it's just not a thing right now. But Kansas is still extremely dangerous, and it was on the scoreboard a game. And Matthew and I talked about this the other day, and I could see it unfold as I got into that game. Is that Kansas was hanging on by a thread, while Texas was just far dominant from a physical standpoint. That it just seems as though Texas is more of a top 3 or 4 team in this country, and Oklahoma, until proven otherwise, is more like a top 20 team in the country. That's just my observation to date.
And I would agree with you, Mark, if this game was played in a vacuum, but it's not. That's the issue. Is this I've just seen it so many times where I expect to go watch a game and I know what's going to happen. It just doesn't happen in this game. It just doesn't. For whatever reason, I don't know why, because there's other rivalries. I watch Auburn, Alabama. I've seen Alabama dog walk Auburn for like 4 to 5 years in a row. I've seen Ohio State do this, the same thing with Michigan. That just doesn't really happen here. You get the one-off every now and then like you had last year, but like 9 out of the last 10 games at this stadium have been one-score games. 9 out of the last 10. The average margin of victory for Oklahoma is 5.6 over the last decade against Texas. This game is just close. It is. I don't know why, because Oklahoma's been better than us for half of that, like way better than us. There was a game where Baker Mayfield took them, it was 24-17. They ended up winning. And Texas wasn't good that year either. So, and then, like I said, Charlie Strong beats Oklahoma with Tyron Swoops at quarterback. Probably you could make an argument that is our worst coach and our worst quarterback to ever play at the University of Texas, and they beat Oklahoma, a team that made the college football playoff. There's an argument to be made there. So this game's just weird. I would agree with you. Just you put these teams on a video game, you run a simulation. I think Texas in 1,000 games probably beats them 750 of the 1,000 times, maybe 800. But that's just not how this goes. It isn't. And I think it's going to be a good game. I really do. I'm hoping it's not. I don't want to be sweating, running around my living room in the fourth quarter watching Oklahoma about to go in and win this game, but it could happen.
Yeah, I think, Mark, to your point, the jury is out on Oklahoma this year to a large degree based on the schedule. Oklahoma hasn't been challenged the way that Texas has against Alabama. Now, I would kind of say the rest of the schedule is pretty much a wash when you look at Texas compared to Oklahoma in terms of some of the teams that they've played. Kansas is very similar to SMU in a lot of ways, right? I mean, I think you've got Kansas, even in Cincinnati, that are very comparable. We've talked a lot about the Big 12. It is very even when you get past Oklahoma and Texas, and maybe even Kansas State, right? So, but I think to a large degree, Oklahoma hasn't been challenged. Certainly not the way that Texas has been challenged. And the Alabama game, there's a lot of talk, and you mentioned this brilliantly, Mark. That there's a lot of talk that this Alabama team isn't the same, and they're not quite as good as they have been in the past, particularly at quarterback, particularly offensively, right? But still is, for me, I still think it's the best win in college football this year that Texas has. Now, you can make an argument for Ohio State going into South Bend and winning that game over Notre Dame, and so that's very, very close, but still, it's the best win in the country. Oklahoma doesn't have it, and they haven't been, they've had a little bit of adversity from time to time early on in the year, but they haven't had a lot, right? They've taken care of, the schedule has not been strong, but they've taken care of business the way that you would expect a top 10 to top 15 team to take care of business against teams like that. So I think this is a top 10 to top 15 team, right? I think what you learn on Saturday is can it be a top 5 team? Texas is clearly a top 5 team in my mind. I think, and again, my Oklahoma fans here, stop looking and just listen, or don't kill me in the comments. I think Texas, for my money, in what I've seen this year, and I've watched every team play to this point, they're the best team in the country. I think when you look at it up and down the lineup, both offensively and defensively, at the line of scrimmage, at the skill position, what they've been able to do, they look different this year. They act different. And a lot of times in this game, as you mentioned, Matt, it's very cliche to say throw the records out, but it just happens so many times in this game where I think where the team that is the most talented doesn't always win. In a lot of cases, a lot of times doesn't win. For whatever reason it is. I don't know if it's the backdrop or if it's the situation surrounding it. Whatever it is, it's the biggest game on each team's schedule every year, no matter what. I mean, yes, I know Texas put a ton into that Alabama game, right? But I think still they would say this is the one that they need to win. This is the one that they want to win. Very similarly for Oklahoma. So you just don't know what to expect, Mark. I mean, it's just like you have an idea of what both of these teams look like, but you just really don't know what to expect until the game kicks off. Because, I mean, there's been, as you mentioned the Tyron Swoops game, and there's been several games where Oklahoma was a decidedly better on both sides of the ball, and for whatever reason, just didn't make it happen. Texas also won a game with Case McCoy at quarterback as well against Oklahoma. And so, like I said, you have an idea, but you don't completely know until what happens. I think the one thing that is super exciting, I think, for Oklahoma fans is the direction that the program is going in second year. I know there was a lot of question marks around last year going 6-7. Is Britt Venables the guy? Is he's the guy to bring them into the SEC? And so I think you've seen considerable improvement on both sides of the ball. And I think the biggest thing that I look for, and Matt mentioned this as well, that it's going to be a big game of adjustments. Oklahoma has been really good this year in a couple of situations where they've been gashed a couple of times on defense of making adjustments. I mentioned the Iowa State game where Oklahoma gave up 98 total yards in the last 39 minutes of that game after getting gashed a couple of times. We don't have to go very far to look at our friends from Southern California this last weekend, just to look at how much better this is than what you see there. So I think a lot of Oklahoma fans, if you would just inject a truth serum into them, we just want to be competitive in this game. I think, if Oklahoma comes out and they lose this game by 7 to 10 points, yes, you're going to be disappointed because you lose the game. But I think after you let it marinate for a couple of days, you'll be super, super pumped about the direction of this program, understanding kind of where the talent level is for both teams currently, that you're in this game. Now, if Texas wins this game by 17 to 21 points, then I think some questions: are we that much better than we were a year ago, or are we a product of what our schedule looks like? So again, a lot of and of course, like I said, of course you want to win the game, and I think the Hopium and Sooner Nation will be off the charts if Oklahoma finds a way to win this game, because I think, number one, the schedule sets up pretty well for them down the stretch. And I think, number two, either way this goes, I would be a little bit surprised if we don't have, round 2 in Arlington at the end of the year, just for what Oklahoma's schedule looks like and what Texas's schedule looks like coming down the stretch.
Well, and that's why I've been preparing myself and other Texas fans where if we do lose, just calm down, because we win out, we'll probably see him again. And if we see him again and we beat him, we're going to be right where we need to be anyway. So just calm down if we lose. But I do obviously want to win. I would rather avoid that, just go undefeated. That's what I want to do. But it just makes me have shivers up and down my spine that I hear an Oklahoma fan saying we're the best team in the country. And 2 years ago at this time, I was preparing myself after we lose to Oklahoma. We lose 6 games in a row. That's where we've come in 2 years. So, I mean, it's crazy. It really is.
All right, folks. It's Red River on Saturday. It's noon Eastern, 11 a.m. where it counts. They're in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl on ABC. Matthew will have the Texas side of post game, and Jason will have the Oklahoma side. And you can join Jason right here, whether you're watching on the Big 12 channel or on the Oklahoma channel. And you can join Matthew on the Texas and Big 12 channels for post game directly following. And Jason's going to line up a Sooner Tailgate live show on Friday as well. Do you have an idea what time you'll be able to deliver that, Jason?
I think I'm thinking around probably close to the same time. It may be 4 p.m. As opposed to 3 by the time I get down there.
Very good. All right, guys, this has been a whole lot of fun. I've learned a lot about both teams, and Matthew makes a great point about the closeness of this game, because I've got a good handle on every major rivalry in college football. And yes, there are improbable results when they play year after year after year. You can find improbable results and upsets in every rivalry, but that's an overplayed hand when it comes to throw out the records. No, don't throw out the records. The better team wins these games almost all the time in rivalries. And this is the one game that cliche comes into play more so than the other ones. It just does. That's been the history, that regardless of the records, it's been a close game, and there have been upsets more frequently than in other rivalries across the nation, no doubt.
And I think it's because of the atmosphere, and honestly, the time of the game, I think, plays an impact on that too. Noon. It's hard to get up for a rivalry game. Well, it isn't hard to get up, but you're just pumped up, got up, ate breakfast. Now you're ready to go hit the guy you hated from the state right up north. So it's an interesting environment.
Absolutely. It's a unique one. And also another historic angle to this one that's different from every other is obviously the last time that the two will compete as Big 12 teams. So I don't know what's going through Brett Yormark's mind. I phrased the live stream that we had you on, Matthew, the other day, basically that on one hand, this game's going to save the Big 12 momentarily because it's the best game, it's the biggest game, it's going to grab some national attention, huge national attention in a year in which the Big 12 appears to be pretty down. But long term, that's not good for the Big 12 because they're setting sail in 3 months. So not a good look for the Big 12 going forward, having its two best brands that we already know, but its two best programs currently also moving on.
I think he looks at us like old dairy cows, just milking that last ounce of money and get out of us and then go off the pasture. I don't need you anymore.
There it is.
Well, and I think it's interesting, really, I was just going to mention this really quick, that, there's been a couple of tweets out the last couple of weeks, really, from the Big 12 Conference, really kind of supporting Oklahoma and Texas. And I don't know about you, Matthew, but the Oklahoma fans have just like roasted anything Big 12 related. So I'm curious from your, is the hatred the same in Texas and Austin for the Big 12? Like, it's just like anything the Big 12 puts out about Oklahoma, it's like, get the hell out of here. We don't want anything to do with you. And so much so that I think earlier this week that Greg Sankey announced that he was going to be in Dallas, and there was just like, I don't know, it's very I knew that there was a lot of people on both Oklahoma and Texas side ready to get out of the conference, ready to go to the SEC, but it's just been brutal on Twitter the last week or so about that. I was curious if it was the same thing for Texas as well.
No, it definitely has been. And the thing is, they did it to themselves. Like Brett Yomark, the comments he's made over the offseason, I mean, what do you expect? Like Steve Sarkisian, when he made those comments, he's like, well, I guess he's not coming over to our house for Thanksgiving. He'll be at Texas Tech's house. And yeah, I mean, what do you expect when you make those comments? And yeah, I saw a post of, we'll be there in Dallas. The Big 12's all excited and whatever. They're like, kick rocks. Go watch Oklahoma State and Kansas State. That's your conference. We don't need you. And I thought that was funny. It's like, yeah, go watch the game that only probably 500,000 people are going to watch, and not the game that, I don't know, 7 million people will probably tune into at some point. So it's funny to me. It's I didn't even hate the Big 12 before this, and I think Brett Yomark's done a good job of like realignment and everything, but he just didn't need to make the comments he made, and I thought it was kind of selfish and stupid because you're still benefiting. Like you're gonna, like I said, you're gonna make a crap ton of money from this game.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mark, be ready. I'm sure there'll be a ton of SEC chants, whether it be on game day or through the stadium on Saturday. It's about the only thing that we. It's about the only thing that we can agree on, right? I think at this point, right?
I don't know if you guys have seen like the pictures of like the Bloods and Crips coming together holding their handkerchiefs. That's what it's like with Texas and Oklahoma. And there's been multiple people that Texas fans are rooting for Oklahoma to get to the Big 12 championship game. So if we're both there, we can literally be chanting SEC at the Big 12 championship game. That's the dream of Texas and Oklahoma.
For sure.
Yeah, that will be a crazy sight if that comes together, because it's basically the Big 12 season's over, so it's almost like this is an SEC game, going forward in 20.
It's the early game for the other SEC championship. It's the matinee. You can go watch two of them at the same day.
So yes, the Big 12, ardent Big 12 people, Brett Yormark. Oh man. That will make him sick to his stomach and handing that trophy to either one of those teams for sure.
I know when he did in basketball to our team, he looked like here and then tried to get out of the picture as soon as possible. And people caught him and he's just like so disappointed. And it was pretty funny. So I'm hoping that happens again.
That's great. All right, folks. Appreciate you being here. Making on back next to Wednesday for OU Sooners Live. And again, Texas Tuesdays with Matthew and Sooners Tailgate with Jason and post game on both sides. All right, guys. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, guys.